I think Christmas meant a little bit more that year. The presents weren't the main thing. I'm celebrating what Christ did for us, and at the same time, I'm thankful for the ways he's blessed us this year. So it was different than any Christmas we'd had before.
And a Christmas the Ferguson family will never forget. It all began that November in 2016 with an early morning phone call.
The call woke us up around 4 a.m. It was the hospital telling us to get to Tallahassee as soon as possible. Caleb was in an accident.
Caleb was Dan and Debbie's 18-year-old son, a freshman at Florida State University.
The phone call made it sound like we needed to get to the hospital quickly in case we had to say goodbye.
It happened around 1:30 a.m. Caleb was riding his skateboard back home from the school library when he took a fall and hit his head on the concrete. When EMTs arrived, he was unresponsive and bleeding from his ears and nose.
Caleb's life was definitely in jeopardy.
Dr. Lawson was the neurosurgeon on call.
Aside from the traumatic brain injury that he had, there were several other medical conditions going on. He had rhabdomyolysis, possibility for kidney injuries, fevers, it looks like a pneumonia. So he had a bunch of medical issues going on in addition to his traumatic brain injury.
4 hours after getting the news, Dan and Debbie arrived at Tallahassee Memorial Hospital. They found their son in a medically induced coma.
I just asked Dan, I'm like, is Caleb gonna die? You know, because it was so uncertain, we just didn't know.
That's when I got scared. And that's when the fear and the enormity of what possibly could happen really kind of sunk in.
Over the next couple of days, doctors monitored Caleb closely. If his brain continued to swell, he would need surgery to reduce the pressure.
A few days later, his pressure actually went higher. He had a couple of other medical issues going on that prevented us from sort of optimizing his brain pressure, so we needed to sedate him even more heavily.
Using Caring Bridge and social media, Dan and Debbie kept friends and family updated on Caleb's condition. People around the world were praying for his healing.
There were times where we would say, okay, this is happening right now. He's having a procedure right now, and they would pray, and the procedure would go beautifully.
However, Dan admits that their faith was tested.
There were times where I was angry and wondered where God was. Why wasn't he doing something quicker? I think my faith that God was with us during that time was pretty constant, and I would say that I felt him near.
By the second week, Caleb's brain pressure had normalized, but doctors were still concerned.
I was fairly confident he was going to survive, but I was not very confident in how he might do. There was a lot of uncertainty. You know, how bad is his brain injury going to be? Is he going to be able to go back to college? Is he going to be able to talk?
When you as a dad want to help your child and you can't do anything but sit there and watch, it's very helpless. And it was exhausting. It was discouraging for us.
Slowly, they brought Caleb out of his coma. A brain scan showed no major damage, but he could barely move his limbs.
They didn't know if he had a spinal injury, and thinking about Caleb possibly being wheelchair bound was devastating.
Fearing the worst, Caleb's family and their church continued to pray as Caleb worked and fought to regain his motor functions. Eventually, he was transferred to Brooks Rehab Facility.
They were thinking that he would have some side effects. Could have been that we really had to work a lot with his fine motor skills. He had a hard time with any kind of just touching, bringing his hand up to touch his nose. It took a lot of effort, and oftentimes he would get about halfway and then he'd just drop his hand. He couldn't do it.
I'm not the giving up kind of person. I wasn't gonna let this determine the way I was gonna live my life.
As Caleb pushed through rehab, cards and prayers of encouragement continued to pour in.
I would get 5, 6, 7, 10 letters a day from people back home sending me stuff like, praying for you, we've been here with you this entire time, you know, you're gonna make an awesome recovery, God's with you, he has you in his hands. That's when the turning point was.
Doctors said he would be in rehab at least 6 weeks. Caleb was released in 2, just in time for Christmas, his favorite holiday. With a little more outpatient therapy, he made a full recovery.
Being able to come home and be with my family during Christmas and going to the Christmas service and just being able to be there, you know, knowing that it could have been a possibility that I wouldn't, you know, I could have died. I could have not been able to remember. I could have been alive, but I could have been, you know, not myself. Being able to walk, you know, around and see things and do things, that I can't put it into words how much it means to me.
So when we saw him back in follow-up in the office, he was doing great. In fact, he was planning to go back to college later that year. So it looked like he made a complete recovery.
Emmanuel took on a different meaning in that just because he arose, his spirit's still here. And through that whole process, I felt God's presence. I don't know how people can walk through these kind of situations without having an assurance that you're not walking through it alone.
God didn't promise that things would be easy for us in this life. He said, you're going to face trials and hard things, but in the midst of that, I'm going to be with you. And it just, to me, showed me the power of what the church can do as we come together and unite on one purpose and pray together and ask God to do something. And God did a miracle for us.